with over one-third of the Earth's surface degraded and over 3.2 billion people negatively affected by degradation, a conversation around desertification and land use is urgently needed. Welcome everyone to the important session titled What is at Stake in the Upcoming Land Negotiations. This is the third and last part of our What the COP series, brought to you by the Youth and Landscape Initiative in collaboration with the Global Landscapes Forum. We are here to discuss today the crucial issues surrounding desertification and land degradation and the role of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, also known as the UNCCD. Today, we have three inspiring speakers that will share their insights. First, we have Nancy Barisoa. She's from Madagascar, and she's part of the Youth and Landscapes Initiative as intern and part of the UNCCD Youth Caucus Gender and Land Tenure co-facilitator. We also have Beatriz Azevedo from Brazil. She's a lawyer and environmental activist. And last but not least, we have Billie Dumaliang from the Philippines, co-founder and advocacy director at Mazungi Georeserve Foundation. Welcome to the three of you to this amazing episode, and let's get started with our set of questions. First, I want to start with you, Beatriz, so we can talk a little bit about what can we expect from COP16. Because despite decades of efforts, land degradation continues at an alarming rate. We are seeing, as I mentioned, that 3.2 billion people already lives in a place that degradation impacts them. So what could make UNCCD COP16 different to bring transformative change in global land governance?
Hi, friend. First of all, I would like to thank you for creating this amazing podcast initiative, and also thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm from Brazil, and when everyone thinks about Brazil, they think about the Amazon rainforest, right? But I live in the Brazilian semi-arid. It's a biome unique in the entire world, and it's called Caatinga. And I think that the UNCCD COPs are very important to raise awareness about desertification because it's something that most people don't know about. And when it comes to the environment, climate change is now a huge issue. So most of the attention goes to that problem. And it's also very important for the Rio Conventions to have those synergies where we talk about other problems such as desertification. Also this year, the UNCCD and COP are launching a youth engagement initiative. And I think that's also a very important topic that is going to be discussed this year because we as young people, I'm a bit, I'm not as young as anymore, but I'm 31 now, but I have been engaged with youth movements since I was in my early 20s. So being a part of these initiatives for a decade now, I can see the importance of having young people involved, having their points of view represented. So I think that's also a huge milestone that's being accomplished this year.
Thank you, Beatriz. Thank you so much for that. And now I want to jump to Billie, since we have a lot of challenge for this upcoming COP. Many countries, particularly in the global south, have set ambitious land degradation neutrality, also known as LDN. These are targets under the UNCCD. What concrete actions should COP16 prioritize to ensure that these targets are met by 2030? And what specific challenges do countries in the global south face achieving these goals? So I want to start with you, Billie, and then we'll go with Nancy.
Yes, well, in the upcoming COP, I'm excited to know more about the exact financing and technical capacity building opportunities there are for countries in the global south or countries in general, because I think we already have established the science of why land degradation is important to combat. but the tools of how to implement it nationwide and in terms of the local communities are not yet that refined. So I think we want to move from research and just data and talk, and we want to go into the action already. And for action to really happen on the ground, we need the guidance of the international community towards what really will make a global impact, right? If we do it in our own localities, if we do it in our own countries. I'm also quite excited because last or early this year, we had, had a discussion with the executive director of the UNCCD together with Bea and the other land heroes, where he really had emphasized the importance of integration. So I'm really curious to know how this integration will move forward, because as developing countries, as countries in the global south, we do have a lot of goals and targets, and this is only one of them. So how does the UN, how would the UN and the international community encourage developing countries and countries in the global south to integrate the land degradation goals into the broader national agenda, as well as the international commitments that different countries also need to achieve? So I'm excited for those two things and looking forward for the youth and other grassroots movement to be part of this.
Thank you, Billie. Nancy, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you so much, Francisco, for this really important question. And indeed, in Africa, we have 48 countries who are pursuing the land degradation neutrality targets under UNCCD. But what we see is that, unfortunately, degradation continues to impact the continent. We see that everywhere. Just take an example of Nigeria. Nigeria, for example, loses around 350,000 hectares of forest annually. This happens every year. And land degradation is affecting around 60% of its population, according to the report. And not only in Nigeria, we see that in almost African countries. We see that in Ethiopia as well, where it is estimated that the land degradation affects around 27% of cropland, and that leads to their annual economical loss, according to the World Bank as well. So we see these numbers, we see these figures, and this shows that how land degradation not only damages the ecosystems, but also undermines economies, as I said previously regarding Ethiopia. So now, what we need to do during the COP16, so as the Food and Agriculture Organization said it so well, we need to take bold action. And by bold action, we need to build local capacity, strengthening regional initiatives, because now, as Billie said, it's not time to talk anymore, it's time to take action. So we must leverage these platforms such as COPs and the other conferences to amplify the voices of those facing these challenges, because people are suffering in many ways and we need urgent support. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Definitely what Billie mentioned about the guidance of the international community, but also the importance of integration, along with what you, Nancy, said about how land degradation not only impacts ecosystem, but also economies. It is really important that COP16 can take action and deliver on these challenges nations and societies in general are facing due to land degradation and desertification. We definitely need both action on build local capacity, and definitely it's time to take action. And I think that's part of what the three Rio conventions are in agreement with, or at least in consensus, and need to take urgent action and to coordinate efforts, which it might be a great opportunity this year, since we have the three Rio conventions happening in a very small span of time. Thank you, both of you, for your insights on this. And now I want to head over to you, Beatriz, because right now, extractive industries like mining and logging are major drivers of land degradation, as you might be aware of since you're from Brazil, but are often protected by political elites. What policies and mechanisms should the international community introduce, for example, at the upcoming COP16, the UNCCD COP, to hold these industries accountable? And what role should governments play in enforcing stricter regulations on land use?
I was saying that is a very complex question, because whenever we are talking about local governments and political elites, and how policies play a role locally, we are talking about very different groups depending on which region. But I will talk about my context here in Brazil. So it might be a different context when compared to other regions. But here in Brazil, we actually have a very good environmental legislation. So our environmental policy is really good. It's a model for the world. I think that what we need to accomplish is to be able to enforce that legislation. And also now with huge energy projects coming to my region, for instance. So whenever we have, let's say, a solar panel plant that's going to deforest, I would say, 4,000 hectares of Caatinga, which is our local biome. So when we are talking about such huge projects, it's really important to have social and environmental safeguards in place so we can make sure that these projects are able to happen, because of course we need renewable energies. We need to transition from fossil fuels towards renewable energies. That's not the case. That's not the point in question. But how are we going to make this transition in a way that is just, that is environmentally balanced? Because if you put such huge projects one next to the other and there isn't a planning process happening behind this kind of sustainable development, what is going to create, this is going to create basically deserts, and entire cities are going to get affected by the effects of this kind of development that is not considering all the variables, that is not considering these social and environmental safeguards. So currently, I would say that yes, mining and logging are major drivers of land degradation, but we need to think about all industries. We need to think about even these new industries that are coming up with all this pressure that we're creating to transition from fossil fuels towards renewable energies. And these things have to be taken into consideration in local decision making and also internationally, because when we have these discussions going on in the international level, then we have some kind of leverage when we go back to the local level. So for instance, ever since I won the Land Heroes Award, and Billie was there with me in Germany this year, she is also a land hero, the kind of attention that people started giving me here locally changed. So lots of companies, I work with the private sector now, and lots of companies approached me because they saw me in the UN and they wanted to work with me. So that kind of recognition also plays a role. So I would say that we need international processes, because these processes are very good at raising awareness about certain issues. And at the same time, we need to be mobilized locally to ensure that these new safeguards, these new instruments are created to really promote sustainable development.
Thanks, Beatriz. Definitely, all industries are part of this conversation and needs to be addressed and held accountable for impacts on land in general. So definitely, they all need to be part of the conversation, and also locally led initiatives and interventions. Locals interventions are needed in order to ensure that the frameworks and instruments, as you mentioned, includes the sustainability perspective of the local territory. Now, with these challenges on mind, let's move forward, and now let's try to focus on solutions for a little bit. Nancy, I would like to understand better the financial resources for combating desertification. because we know that these are often inadequate or not enough, or it has its own challenges. How could or how can the upcoming UNCCD COP16 ensure that funding for land restoration is, number one, equitable distributed, and number two, that global South nations are not left to shoulder the burden of degradation caused by historical exploitation?
All right, so thank you for that. Also, another really important question. So now for the record, land degradation costs Africa around 65 billion per year, like 65 billion dollar per year. And yet we see that financing, as when you ask the question as well, financing for restoration remains major challenge. And we see that everywhere in the global south. So, for example, the flagship program of the UNCCD, the Great Green Wall Initiative, which aims to restore 100 million hectares of current degraded land, has only achieved not 50%, not 30%, but 80%, less than 20%, and of its target, according to the United Nations Development Program report. And we see that it's due to the lack of funding. Yet we can see how this program can restore a lot of ecosystems. And these gaps leaves many nations struggling to implement restoration at scales, especially in rural and underdeveloped countries that we see most often in Africa. So at COP16, what needs to be done is that it's essential for wealthier nations to increase the contribution to the Global Environment Facility and the UNCCD Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, because this will help support land restoration towards vulnerable countries, as we talked previously. But most importantly, what is really important is that funding must be distributed fairly so that countries in the global south are not left to handle the burden of land degradation on their own, as we are seeing happening now. So yeah, let's see what will happen at COP16. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Let's hope for the best. Finance definitely, as well as the challenges that we discussed, are a consensus along the three Rio conventions. Definitely finance mechanisms and ensure that it has its just and fair access for developing or underdeveloped countries or global South countries as well, and communities, is essential for the three conventions as well. So definitely finance for restoration is needed and is one of the main challenges that this COP needs to deliver on. Now let's go over to you, Beatriz, once again. I would like to ask you for sustainable land management, since this is a core principle under the UNCCD. What specific policies or practices do you believe needs to be scaled up or reformed to make the norm across all levels of
policy? As I said before, I think that especially here in Brazil, we already have very good policies in place. I think that our next level of development in those policies would be really to focus on enforcement. And one specific policy I think it's very important, which is focused on environmental education to prevent land degradation and, of course, promote sustainable land management. Because here in my region, here in Ceará, yes, as we mentioned previously, there are extractive and there are energy industries that can promote land degradation, but also local farmers, local people, small farmers even, can have a role in that issue, because land degradation can be also promoted by farmers when they burn the soil or when they exhaust the resilience of the soil because of the activities that they perform in their territory. So I would say that environmental education is such a key issue. and also to be able to educate people in a way that they can understand. So translate knowledge and take those instructions and make them accessible for them in a way they can understand. I think that schools have a very important role to play in that area, but also just raising awareness about the issue locally and having a very good policy in place that can really engage those citizens, can really engage these different audiences, and let them know that sustainable land management is also good for the productivity of their land. It's also good to have a better harvest. So I think this is something that I always focus on, which is raising awareness and promoting concrete environmental education actions.
Thank you, Beatriz. Precisely, in order for people to have power and to engage in these discussions and conversations, they need to know what's going on, and education is fundamental. In that regards, I invite our audience to check out the tools and knowledge database, basically, that the GLF has built over the years, in which you can share, learn, and act around these pressing issues that Beatriz was mentioning, about the issues and solutions that also can drive positive change to our communities and territories. Now, I wanted to ask the same thing to you, Nancy. What specific policies or practices do you believe, do you consider needs to be scaled up or reformed to make this the norm across all levels of policy?
All right, so yeah, sustainable land management is a really important principle under the UNCCD. But before I go on to the policy, it's important to understand the issues and the factors from these issues. So as we see, many African countries face significant land degradation issues, and we see the factors like deforestation, overgrazing, or even unsustainable agricultural practices. And for example, I won't take for example, but in my country, Madagascar, about 80% of the country's original forest has been lost, leading to severe soil erosion, loss of biodiversity, and also challenges in the local communities. So we see those problems, and the combination of climate change and poor land management exacerbates these challenges, and it results to increased desertification like we see in the southern Madagascar. So to address these issues, the UNCCD emphasizing the need of a sustainable land management, as already said. So in this sustainable land management, we need to scale up the efforts in several key areas. There's a lot, but for the sake of time, I only cite some of them, like integrating the practices into the national policies in all countries. We also need to invest more in agricultural research and development because, yeah, we see the unsustainable practices, unfortunately, due to lack of knowledge, unfortunately. And what's really important as well is improving education and training for local communities because they're the one who will be mostly in touch with the land. And yeah, we have these strategies, and now I believe it's time to implement them. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. 80% of its natural areas lost in Madagascar. That's huge. And with that, I want to go over to you, Billie. And knowing this fact, it's visible that land degradation and climate change are deeply interconnected. If you lose natural areas, if you lose forests, if you lose land in general, you're going to lose the fight against climate change. So how can the UNCCD COP16 ensure that land restoration becomes a key part of global climate strategies without neglecting the unique challenges of land-specific issues?
Yes, so like you said, land degradation issues and land restoration is such a huge building block of combating the climate crisis. And we should call it that way, because when you invest in land restoration, you invest in climate mitigation, climate adaptation, as well as the preservation of species. So I feel like for COP, we should really step up and really package the land restoration solutions as not only a solution to the land degradation problem, but also to its other related issues such as climate change, biodiversity, and poverty. So I think we need to market it a little bit more and really highlight nature-based solutions such as land restoration and sustainable agriculture as a climate solution and as a building block towards achieving our nationally determined contributions. So, there's really supposed to be a good communication and good coordination between the different conventions. And hopefully we get to emphasize the different co-benefits that we achieve through land restoration projects. I guess in my experience in the Philippines, land restoration as it is marketed or packaged isn't really a sexy word, and it's not really so interesting. But when you look at what land restoration really is, it's actually a very good opportunity for green jobs, for cheaper ways to produce agriculture, more efficient agriculture. So it does respond to a lot of our current challenges. But the way that we package it, the awareness levels of what land restoration really is still, I think, missing a piece of the puzzle that if we, fill in that gap, we could achieve a lot more.
Thank you, Billie. Definitely more ambition and more determination is needed in terms of land degradation, and of course, including people in these solutions that we want to drive and that we want to deliver for these present challenges such as climate crisis and land degradation itself. Now, Billie, I want to keep asking you because you mentioned how important it is to take into consideration as well the people and the inequalities that also comes with the climate crisis and land degradation itself. You mentioned already some of these present challenges and inequalities. Some policies in that regard, some policies contributing to land degradation in the global south have roots in colonial era land governance systems. How can we confront these colonial legacies and promote land governance models that center indigenous peoples and local communities living in landscapes? How could the international community ensure that land restoration efforts prioritize the needs of people?
Yes, I'm really very passionate about this topic on land tenure. I feel like it's something that's really unique to the UNCCD to tackle, but also very, very important and urgent, especially for developing countries, because without adequate land tenure, there is conflict, there is poverty, there is land degradation. And so this is a really important topic to reform. And I think for the Philippines, for example, where I belong, I know that there's a huge gap in streamlining our land policies, in making sure they are harmonized with our forest laws, with our land tenure laws, with our zoning laws. So there's just a lot of different overlapping and contrasting policies that if we're able to streamline, if we're able to really think about and iron out, we'll be able to solve a lot of these issues. The problem is that there's political resistance to doing that because there are political interests that hinder these tenurial policies. So what I feel needs to happen is that the international community needs to step in, because this is really, really an important foundational aspect of combating land degradation. So I feel like they need to build champions within governments, within policymakers, within those ranks, and capacitate them in order for local policies, local laws to push these reforms. And that only happens when they invest in people, when the international community puts pressure onto governments and to politicians to make that change happen.
Thank you, Billie. And to Beatriz, I want to also ask you to add to what Billie just mentioned around the urgent need to have this in mind and to ensure that their voices and their criteria is included in the decision-making process. So I would like to ask you the same question and yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think that land tenure is a very important issue when it comes to indigenous peoples. So here in Brazil, for them to have their territories created by law is a huge issue. But also, as we have previously mentioned, having trainings and capacity building activities, not trying to teach them how to take care of their land, but also trying to incorporate their ideas and thoughts into policymaking and seeing how everyone can contribute towards sustainable land management. And a very important tool that has been very discussed locally is the prior and informed consent. So it's a human rights norm, and it's very important when it comes to big projects. So to have indigenous peoples considered about their territories and what kinds of projects are going to be implemented in their territories is also very important, because of course we need to have civil society engagement and hear from different perspectives when it comes to decision making. But precisely when we're talking about implementing initiatives, it's very important that the people living in that territory, even if it's indigenous peoples or local communities, that they have a say in how those projects are going to affect their territory. I think that's also very important to take into consideration.
Absolutely, it is. And the voices of people, giving them the power and bringing them to the decision-making processes is essential for, especially for local communities and underrepresented groups of people as well. Nancy, I wanna go with you about precisely something similar to this. And it's that local communities and indigenous peoples often possess invaluable knowledge about sustainable land use. Young people are already doing ambitious work to restore their landscapes around the world as well. So how can COP16 and the UNCCD framework could better support youth-led, locally led, and indigenous-led initiatives as a legitimate and effective approach to combating land degradation? And what role should civil society play in shaping global land restoration policies?
Thank you so much, Francisco. And I really love this question. So allow me to be passionate for this question. And yeah, because I'm also part of a youth team of the GLF, and we always make sure that the youth voices are heard. So yeah, we see particularly in Africa, we have the youngest population in the world. You know, here 70% of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, are being under the age of 30, according to the United Nations report. And if we take the example of Kenya, for example, where you have the 20 million tree campaign, it was launched in April this year, and it aimed to plant 20 million trees in Kenya's forest. That's why you have the name 20 million trees campaign. And you know, in this campaign, youth play a crucial role by planting those trees and raising awareness about environmental conservation within their communities. But what happened is that, you know, we see that how important young people are in addressing these issues, and not only in the UNCCD convention, but in all other conventions. But their efforts often lack funding and support from higher policy levels. And Yeah, and we also have many other successful stories on young people and civil society playing a significant role in land restorations across Africa. So yeah, we can do some quick research. And before giving the critiques, let's see what is already working within the UNCCD. So, you know, the UNCCD is making a process by offering a YouTube channel focused on helping youth understand land and desertification. So if you type on YouTube UNCCD capacity building, you'll find a lot of them, and they're making important information easier to find, because I believe that most people have access to YouTube better than any other website. So this is definitely worth checking out. And the UNCCD Youth Caucus was also created during COP14 in 2019, and they are now launching funding to help young people to attend the COP16. So in that term, I believe that they're already doing a good job, as even for COP16 in Saudi Arabia, we even have the Blue Zone platform, which will provide free visas for confirmed delegation. And we noticed all the time that visas have always been a problem for young delegates. But while we appreciate these positive steps, we also need to expand and include the local strategies to make it a real difference, because that's what I see is a problem within the global policies, is that sometimes it doesn't take into account the local communities or the local projects. So they need to be in accordance in order to make even better outcomes than this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, for that passion. And that is right. At the GLF, we do want to hear what the young people say, especially young professionals and youth involved in these negotiations and super important, relevant conferences, and the people's voices in general. Now I want to jump to, actions. Let's close with this last question to the three of you as we look into the future, towards the future. Sorry. What role do you see for youth and civil society in leading the global movement to combat desertification and land degradation? I know we already talked about education, raising awareness, and focusing on locally led initiatives and ideas. So I want to dive deep into that thoughts that the three of you shared with us. What concrete actions or strategies should they prioritize to ensure that the decisions made at COP16 translate into real on-the-ground changes? Let's start with you, Beatriz, then we'll jump to Nancy, and finally, Billie.
I think that when we are talking about our role as youth in this subject and in promoting solutions for this problem, I would say that I would really like people to focus more on green opportunities and green jobs, because another huge issue for youth is entering the job market. And I think that with all of these opportunities that are coming up, when we're talking about sustainable development and renewable energies and nature-based solutions projects, this is a market, right? The green economy is an emerging new market, and we need to build the capacity for young people to be a part of this market and to be employed and be paid, because most of the work that we do is on a voluntary basis. And of course that we have the energy and we have the purpose to pursue these activities and make it happen. But I think that especially with the government and the private sector, it's very important to open concrete opportunities, to create concrete opportunities for young people. So this is not the side job, it's not just the thing that we do on weekends, but it's something that we can build our careers on. And this is something that I have been developing with local companies, because now I have a consultancy. And as a young woman, sometimes some people may undervalue your work because you are a young person. but just not let that stop us, and let's look for education, let's look for opportunities, because we have the ideas and we have the solutions, and we need to not only be heard, but also be hired, I would say.
Thank you, Beatriz. Definitely, we have the energy, capacity, and absolutely we need for young people opportunities that gives them the chance to build a career, a sustainability career, and to provide insights and thoughts, reflections, and criteria to these key crushing issues and challenges. Now over to you, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Beatriz, and thank you for the question, the wonderful question, Francisco. So, yeah, I also agree with you. Sometimes it feels like it's a long-term process, and sometimes it can feel like some people ask, will it be achievable? Will we attain it? And it sometimes can be feel in the sort of a dream. But Nelson Mandela once said, "I have a dream." And for him, that dream came true when the chains of apartheid were broken. And I too have a dream where, land is more than just soil and resources, but is life itself. And in this world, indigenous knowledge is as trusted as scientific expertise. It's a world where global south is no longer asked to bear the weight of environmental degradation alone, and where land restoration is not just environmental concern, but every decision, every policy is made with the health of land and the people who are involved in it. But most importantly, as you talk about youth, I would love to see youth that are not only inheritors of the land, but also stewards of its future. And as the 2024 Restoration Stewards from Kenya, Steve Misiti, said it so beautifully, dream, dream, Africa, dream. And as long as we breathe, we'll fight for the dream of a thriving world for all. Thank you.
It's so powerful, Nancy, and definitely this is a dream that we can build. That we can build a future, absolutely, and bring our voices and make a real change, a consistent change. Now, Billie, over to you for these closing remarks.
Yes, so well, I really believe in the power of young people because our team is also mostly composed of people under 30. And we've shown that, what a young team of dedicated, creative people can do to change an entire landscape. And so, to be able to support young people in creating change in, their desire to change the status quo, to challenge the system, needs to be supported by the older generation, as well as our leaders. So I hope that at COP, our leaders will take cognizance of the status, the situation of land defense on the ground. Land defenders are increasingly being criminalized for their important work. So I want really for us to have more support, more dialogue, perhaps. This is something that the UNCCD and the COPs could facilitate between the land defenders and our governments to see us not as adversaries or threats, but to see us as allies in accomplishing the national and international agenda.
Thank you, Billie. Definitely seeing people as allies, not as enemies of this international agenda is fundamental, especially when it comes to drive solutions and to find the answers to our questions and to the challenges in different areas, different communities, different territories. So definitely that's inspiring. So thank you for sharing that to us. And with this real life comes to an end. Thank you so much to our three speakers for their insightful perspectives on these critical issues. The idea of this series, of the What the COP series, was to precisely show to our audience, to show to the world the power that young people have being involved in these sort of initiatives, conventions, frameworks, and negotiations in general. The knowledge that they have, that we have as young people, and the capacity that we can drive ambition, that we can be practitioners, we can implement projects and initiatives in the ground, but we can also be a force of change and the international climate policy context. So thank you so much. As we look forward to UNCCD COP16, it is definitely clear that the road ahead will require bold action, collaboration, and strong advocacy from civil society, youth, and of course, global leaders. Let's continue to push for solutions that restore our lands and empower the people living in them. Thank you for joining us today, and until the next time, bye.